The Philadelphia Phillies are about to make a decision that could either launch them into World Series glory or become the most regrettable contract in franchise history. We're talking about Kyle Tucker, the superstar outfielder who's supposed to be the hottest commodity on the free agent market, commanding a jaw-dropping $427 million price tag. But here's the million-dollar question, or should I say, the $427 million question. Is this the game-changing move that finally pushes the Phillies over the edge, or are we watching Dave Dombrowski set fire to nearly $500 million on a player who might not even be the right fit? Let's cut through the noise and get real about what's happening in Philadelphia right now. The Phillies' offseason is unfolding like a high-stakes poker game, and Tucker's name keeps getting thrown around like he's the golden ticket. But the more you dig into this situation, the more questions emerge. Why would the Chicago Cubs trade legitimate prospects to acquire Tucker, only to watch him walk away after one season? What does this mean for fan favorite Kyle Schwarber? And most importantly, is Tucker actually the piece this Phillies puzzle needs? Sporting News recently dropped a bombshell report connecting Tucker to Philadelphia, and it's got the entire baseball world buzzing. According to their analysis, Tucker is being viewed as one of the premier free agents available this winter, and the Phillies have positioned themselves squarely in the mix. The Athletics' Jim Bowden went even further, naming Philadelphia as a potential landing spot alongside heavy hitters like the San Francisco Giants, New York Yankees, New York Mets, and Los Angeles Dodgers. That's some serious company, folks, and it tells you everything you need to know about the bidding war that's about to ensue. Tucker's resume is undeniably impressive. At just 28 years old, he's a four-time All-Star who was instrumental in the Houston Astros World Series championship run. Last season with the Cubs, despite battling multiple injuries, he posted a slash line of 266 with 22 home runs and an OPS of 841 across 500 at-bats. He walked 87 times, collected 133 hits, and maintained a 377 on-base percentage with a 464 slugging percentage. These are solid numbers, no question about it. Bowden himself described Tucker as a complete player who threatens to hit 30 home runs and steal 30 bases every season. He impacts the game in every facet: hitting, power, defense, arm strength, and speed. On paper, he's everything a championship-caliber team could want. But here's where things get interesting and, frankly, a bit concerning. When you stack Tucker's numbers against what the Phillies already have in Kyle Schwarber, the comparison becomes fascinating and complicated. Schwarber just finished a monster season with 56 home runs, 132 RBIs, a .365 on-base percentage, and a .563 slugging percentage across 604 at-bats. Those are MVP-caliber numbers. In fact, Schwarber finished second in MVP voting. So the question becomes painfully obvious. Why would you commit $427 million to Tucker when you already have a clubhouse leader and offensive powerhouse in Schwarber, who could be retained for significantly less money? According to projections, Schwarber is looking at a 5-year, $160 million deal. That's substantial money for a designated hitter, absolutely, but it's less than half of what Tucker is expected to command. And here's the kicker. Multiple reports, including one from Matt Gelb of The Athletic, suggest that Tucker is actually the backup plan if the Phillies can't reach an agreement with Schwarber. Think about that for a second. The guy who's supposed to be the franchise-altering acquisition is actually Plan B. Gelb specifically wrote that if Tucker commands a $400 million deal, the Phillies might not have the fortitude to pull the trigger, especially when they could sign Schwarber plus multiple other players for the same price. The financial mathematics here are crucial to understand. Tucker's projected 10-year, $427 million contract would represent one of the largest commitments in baseball history. For a team that already has significant money tied up in Bryce Harper, Trea Turner, Aaron Nola, and Zach Wheeler, adding another massive contract could severely limit the team's flexibility for years to come. Compare that to keeping Schwarber at $160 million over 5 years, and suddenly you've got nearly $270 million to address multiple needs. Bullpen help, additional starting pitching depth, bench upgrades, you name it. From a roster construction standpoint, it's not even close which approach makes more sense. But let's talk about something that doesn't show up in the stat sheets, the intangible factor. Schwarber has become the heartbeat of this Phillies team. He's a vocal leader, a guy who elevates everyone around him, and someone who's embraced the Philadelphia mentality with open arms. The Phillies are a vibes team, a tightly knit group that feeds off energy and camaraderie. When you watch Tucker play, and this is going to sound harsh, but it needs to be said, there's something missing. The body language, the demeanor, the way he carries himself on the field, it all screams disconnect. Multiple observers have noted what can only be described as loser energy emanating from Tucker's game. He looks like he'd be one of the worst hangs in the entire league. Now, does that affect his on-field production? Probably not directly. But does it matter when you're building a championship culture? Absolutely. Think about what makes the Phillies special right now. It's not just the talent, though they certainly have plenty of that. It's the chemistry, the swagger, the feeling that this group genuinely enjoys playing together. Harper is the superstar leader, Turner brings steady excellence, and Schwarber provides the thunder and veteran presence. When you add a player for nearly $500 million, you're not just acquiring statistics. You're bringing in a personality, a presence that will inevitably shape the clubhouse dynamic. If Tucker doesn't fit that mold, if he's someone who plays with a different energy than what Philadelphia has cultivated, then no amount of home runs and stolen bases will justify that investment. The outfield situation in Philadelphia is admittedly a complete mystery right now. Nick Castellanos' future is uncertain at best, with most indications suggesting he'll be playing somewhere other than Philadelphia next season. Harrison Bader's return is questionable. Brandon Marsh is expected to stick around, but Max Kepler likely won't be back. The organization has expressed belief in prospect Justin Crawford, but nobody really knows what the game plan looks like for the outfield as a whole. Tucker would theoretically solve that problem by providing an everyday player you can build around, someone who sets a standard and anchors that position group. But is he worth $427 million to fill that role when there are cheaper alternatives that might fit the team culture better? Let's also address the elephant in the room, the Cubs' bizarre handling of this entire situation. Chicago traded legitimate prospects to acquire Tucker before the 2025 season, presumably with the intention of building around him as a cornerstone player. He had a solid if unspectacular season with them, and now there's seemingly zero expectation or even desire to retain him long-term. That's terrible asset management from Chicago's perspective, but it also raises questions about Tucker himself. Was there something about his fit with the Cubs that didn't work? Did he make it clear he was going to test free agency regardless? Or is this simply a case of Tucker following the money wherever the highest bidder happens to be? That last scenario seems most likely. He'll take the maximum deal from whoever puts the most zeros on the contract, but it's worth considering what that means for team building in Philadelphia. Jim Bowden's list of top 20 free agents and their projected contracts provides additional context for understanding the market. Tucker sits at number 1 with that $427 million projection over 10 years. Schwarber comes in at 5 years, $160 million, which suddenly looks downright reasonable by comparison. Pete Alonso, another name that's been loosely connected to Philadelphia at 6 years, $182 million, represents an interesting alternative, especially given Bryce Harper's stated willingness to move to the outfield if needed. Alonso has his own energy concerns, admittedly, but the guy consistently mashes 40-plus home runs and provides exactly the kind of middle-of-the-order thunder that championship teams need. Alex Bregman's name has also surfaced in connection with the Phillies at 7 years, $189 million, though that would presumably require moving on from Alec Boehm, which doesn't seem to be gaining serious traction. Ranger Suarez, the beloved left-hander, is projected to receive 6 years, $164 million, and that's probably going to be too rich for Philadelphia's blood, given their existing pitching commitments. With money already allocated to Nola, Wheeler, Jesus Luzardo, and with Christopher Sanchez emerging as one of the game's most promising young arms, plus the organization's continued belief in Andrew Painter's potential. Keeping Suarez at that price point seems unlikely. It'll break hearts to see him in another uniform, but that's the business reality. All of these contract projections illuminate a central truth about the Phillies' offseason strategy. They have significant resources to deploy, but those resources aren't infinite. Every dollar committed to Tucker is a dollar that can't be spent elsewhere. Dombrowski has been remarkably open about his intentions this offseason, making podcast appearances and public statements about his desire to improve the team. He's positioned himself as someone with tricks up his sleeve, ready to make bold moves after what was admittedly a quiet offseason last year. The outfield represents a blank canvas for him to paint his vision. But the question remains whether that vision should include a $427 million centerpiece or a more diversified approach. The comparison to Trea Turner is instructive here. Tucker should probably be viewed through a similar lens, a guy who does all the little things, an everyday player who contributes in multiple ways beyond just home runs. Turner is arguably the better overall baseball player, but Tucker brings comparable versatility and consistency. The difference is that the Phillies already made their massive commitment to Turner. Adding another contract of that magnitude creates roster construction challenges that could hamstring the organization for a decade. Consider what $427 million could buy if allocated differently. You could keep Schwarber at $160 million and still have $267 million to work with. That's enough to add 2 or 3 high-impact players who address multiple needs rather than putting all your eggs in one basket. Maybe you bring in a shutdown closer, add a left-handed bat off the bench, upgrade the defensive outfield depth, and still have money left over. Baseball isn't played on spreadsheets, obviously, but the financial flexibility that comes from not committing nearly $500 million to one player cannot be overstated. There's also the track record consideration. Tucker is undeniably talented, but is he someone who makes teammates better? Does he elevate his game in big moments? The Astros' World Series run provides some evidence in his favor, though the sign-stealing scandal complicates that legacy. His single season in Chicago doesn't give us much additional insight, especially since it was marred by injuries and took place on a non-contending team. The Phillies would essentially be betting $427 million that Tucker's best baseball is still ahead of him and that he'll thrive in a pressure-packed environment with championship expectations every single season. The injury history deserves scrutiny as well. Last season, Tucker dealt with multiple ailments that limited his ability to stay on the field consistently. For a guy whose value proposition includes speed and defense alongside hitting and power, durability becomes paramount. A 10-year contract assumes health and sustained performance deep into his 30s. That's an enormous gamble for any player, but especially for someone who's already shown vulnerability to the injury bug. Meanwhile, Kyle Schwarber represents a known quantity. Yes, he's primarily a designated hitter at this point in his career, which means you're paying top dollar for someone who doesn't contribute defensively. But his offensive production is elite, his leadership is irreplaceable, and his comfort level in Philadelphia is evident every time he steps to the plate. He understands what it means to play in this city, to handle the pressure, to embrace the expectations. That familiarity and cultural fit shouldn't be dismissed just because a shinier new toy becomes available on the market. The Mets' signing of Juan Soto last offseason looms large in these discussions. Philadelphia's division rival made a massive splash, committing enormous resources to acquire a generational talent. There's undoubtedly pressure on the Phillies to match that kind of bold move, to send a message that they're all in on competing for championships. But signing someone just to keep up with the Joneses, or the Cohens in this case, is a recipe for disaster. The Phillies need to make decisions based on what genuinely improves their roster and fits their organizational culture, not what makes the biggest headlines. Here's a thought experiment worth considering. If you could have Kyle Schwarber plus 2 or 3 solid complementary pieces, or just Kyle Tucker for essentially the same total investment? Which roster construction gives you a better chance to win the World Series? Baseball is a team sport where depth matters enormously, especially over the grueling 162-game season and into October. Star power is important, obviously, but so is having quality players up and down the lineup and throughout the pitching staff. The diversified approach might not generate the same Twitter buzz, but it might prove more effective when games actually count. The prospect of Justin Crawford also factors into these calculations. The Phillies have expressed genuine belief in the young outfielder's potential, though it's unclear whether he's ready for everyday big league duty right now. If Crawford can develop into even a solid regular, that changes the entire outfield equation. Suddenly you're looking at Marsh, Crawford, and potentially one more piece rather than necessarily needing to invest $500 million to solve the problem. Player development matters, and the Phillies have shown an improved ability to cultivate young talent in recent years. Betting on internal options while supplementing intelligently through free agency represents a viable path forward. The leadership vacuum that would be created by Schwarber's departure cannot be ignored either. He's become one of the most consistent and important members of this lineup, someone teammates look to when things get tough. His tenure in Philadelphia, though relatively short, has been defined by production, professionalism, and genuine connection to the fan base. Replacing that intangible value is nearly impossible, regardless of how many home runs the replacement hits or how many bases he steals. If Tucker does indeed command something close to $400 or $500 million in this bidding war, it seems increasingly likely that the Phillies will bow out of those negotiations. Dombrowski is aggressive and willing to spend, but he's also experienced enough to know when a price has spiraled beyond reasonable value. The possibility exists that Philadelphia ends up with neither Schwarber nor Tucker if they're outbid for Schwarber while pursuing him and Tucker's asking price escalates beyond their comfort zone. That worst-case scenario would force them to pivot to yet another plan, potentially scrambling to address the outfield through a combination of lesser free agents and trades. The Yankees, Mets, Giants, and Dodgers all represent serious competition for Tucker's services. Each of those organizations has deep pockets and pressing needs that Tucker could address. The Dodgers in particular seem like a natural fit given their recent track record of acquiring and maximizing superstar talent. If it turns into a bidding war between Los Angeles and New York teams, Philadelphia might find themselves priced out regardless of their initial interest level. So where does all this leave us? The Kyle Tucker sweepstakes represents everything thrilling and terrifying about modern baseball free agency. You've got a genuinely talented player entering his prime years, multiple desperate suitors with money to burn, and projections that border on fantasy in terms of total dollars committed. For the Phillies, Tucker represents a potential solution to their outfield questions and a marquee addition that would signal championship ambitions. But he also represents enormous financial risk, questionable culture fit, and the opportunity cost of not spending those resources in more targeted ways. The smart money seems to be on Philadelphia prioritizing Schwarber, then using whatever remaining financial flexibility they have to address multiple needs rather than chasing Tucker at any cost. That's the move that balances competitiveness with sustainability, that maintains the team's chemistry while still improving the roster. But Dombrowski didn't build his reputation by playing it safe, and we can't rule out the possibility that he sees something in Tucker that makes the investment worthwhile despite all the questions. One thing is certain, this offseason is shaping up to be anything but quiet for the Phillies. After last year's relative inactivity, Dombrowski seems determined to make noise and shake things up. Whether that means breaking the bank for Tucker, bringing back Schwarber, pivoting to someone like Alonso, or crafting some entirely unexpected solution remains to be seen. The outfield is indeed a blank canvas, and how the front office chooses to paint it will define this franchise's trajectory for years to come. The vibes matter in Philadelphia. This is a city that connects with players who embrace the grind, who show up with passion and authenticity, who understand what it means to chase a championship. Tucker's talent is undeniable, but talent alone doesn't guarantee he'd thrive in that environment. Sometimes the right fit matters more than the biggest name, and sometimes spending wisely beats spending lavishly. As we wait for these dominoes to fall, one thing is clear. The Philadelphia Phillies are big game hunting right now, and they're not afraid to swing for the fences. Whether that means landing Kyle Tucker for a historic contract or finding another path to championship contention, we're about to find out what this organization is truly made of. The stakes couldn't be higher, the decisions couldn't be more consequential, and the baseball world is watching to see what happens next in the city of brotherly love. Make sure you're following along with every development as this massive offseason story continues to unfold. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Tucker is worth $427 million for the Phillies? Or should they stick with Schwarber and spend that money elsewhere? What move would you make if you were running the show? Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and let's talk Phillies baseball. This is just the beginning of what promises to be an absolutely wild offseason, and you won't want to miss a single minute of it. The future of this franchise hangs in the balance, and we'll be here breaking it all down every step of the way.